The dust in the archives does not just settle, it suffocates. It layers itself over maps that shouldn't exist and names that have been scrubbed from the collective memory with a surgical, almost frantic precision. I found the first anomaly in a basement in Prague, a city built on bones and silence. It was a municipal survey from 1842, yet the architectural load distribution it described was impossible for the era. The stone wasn't just laid, it was fused. Ask yourself why a pre-industrial society would require foundations capable of supporting 10 times the recorded weight of the structures above them. Not for stability, not for aesthetic, for something else. I looked at the street level and saw the windows, half buried, sinking into the earth, their arched tops peeking out from the pavement like drowning men gasping for air. They call it a mudslide. They call it rising street levels. They call it a natural progression of urban development. But the math of the masonry tells a different story. It speaks of a global event, a sudden inundation that turned the grandeur of a worldwide empire into a series of tomb cities. We are told these buildings were the product of the Victorian era, or the Renaissance, or the neoclassical movement, but the timelines are fractured. They are overlapping shadows. The more I looked, the more the shadows lengthened. I began to see the same red brick, the same star-shaped bastions, and the same copper domes from San Francisco to Sevastopol. It was a singular, unified aesthetic that spanned continents long before the steamship supposedly made the world small. You walk through the streets of any major capital and you see them. The pillars, the grand porticos, the intricate friezes that depict a history we no longer recognize. We are taught to admire them as the peak of human achievement, yet we are never told how they were built with the tools of the time. Think about the logistics. Think about the transport of millions of tons of stone across unpaved wilderness. Think about the precision of the carvings that defy the chisel and the hammer. What if the history we are taught is not a record of progress, but a record of inheritance? What if we didn't build these cities? What if we simply found them? Not inhabited, not thriving, empty. The narrative of the pioneer is a convenient myth designed to mask the reality of the squatter. We moved into the husks of a giant civilization and claimed their masterpieces as our own. We scraped the names off the plinths and replaced them with our generals and our kings. We filled the empty halls with our furniture and our noise, hoping to drown out the silence of the original owners. But the silence is persistent. It lingers in the acoustics of the grand cathedrals, which were never meant for prayer. They were meant for power. Not spiritual power, not political power. Something else. The institutional gatekeeping surrounding the mid-19th century is a wall of paper and lies. If you track the census data of the 1850s, you find gaps that no war or plague can explain. Thousands of people simply vanished, or perhaps they were never there to begin with. We see photographs of newly founded cities like Chicago or Melbourne in their infancy, yet the streets are wide enough for 20 carriages and the buildings are already weathered. The people in these photos look small, out of place, like children wearing their father's suits. They are surrounded by mud and wooden shacks, yet behind them rise marble palaces that would take decades to construct today. There are no cranes, there are no scaffolding systems, there are no piles of debris. There is only the finished product and the strange, haunting absence of the builders. Ask yourself why every major city experienced a great fire between 1850 and 1910. Not one fire, not two. A systematic, global incineration of the evidence. These fires didn't just destroy buildings, they destroyed archives. They destroyed the physical proof of a technology that we can no longer replicate. When the smoke cleared, the new world was born, scrubbed clean of its Tartarian origin. Consider the star forts. They are scattered across every coastline, every strategic inland junction, from the heart of Russia to the islands of the Pacific. We are told they have defensive fortifications designed to withstand cannon fire. But look at the geometry. Look at the fractal complexity of the earthworks. They aren't bunkers, they are circuit boards. The load distribution and the crystalline structures of the stone suggest a purpose far beyond ballistics. They were nodes, part of a global grid designed to harvest atmospheric energy. The domes were not for decoration. The spires were not for aesthetics. They were antennas. They were drawing something from the very air we breathe, a free, limitless power that the current architects of our society could not monetize. So they cut the wires. They removed the gold plating from the domes. They turned the power plants into museums and the antennas into lightning rods. They replaced the ether with the combustion engine and chained us to a grid we have to pay for. They didn't just steal our history, they stole our future. Not for profit, not for control, for something else. The erasure trope is most visible in the maps. If you find a map from the late 1700s, you will see it. Grand Tartaria. It occupies the vastness of northern Asia and parts of North America, a territory larger than any empire in recorded history. Yet, by the mid-1800s, it is gone. It is replaced by unexplored territory, or the sudden expansion of the Russian and British empires. A civilization that spanned the globe was deleted from the textbooks in less than 2 generations. How do you hide an empire? You don't hide the buildings, you change the story of who built them. You turn their technological wonders into follies. You turn their history into mythology. You tell the survivors that they are the first, the brightest, the only ones. You give them a sense of pride in their discovery, so they never look down at the foundations and realize they are standing on a graveyard. The somber truth is that we are a scavenger species, living in the ruins of a golden age. We are the inheritors of a world we do not understand, governed by people who are terrified that we might one day wake up and realize the keys to the kingdom are already in our hands. The pattern is not localized. It is not a series of coincidences. It is a deliberate, orchestrated obscuring of a previous reality. Look at the orphan trains of the 19th century. Thousands upon thousands of children moved across continents to repopulate these empty cities. Where did they come from? Why was there such a massive influx of parentless children at the exact moment the old world was being rebranded? They were the blank slates, the new citizens of a new history. They were told what to believe, and they passed those lies down to us. We are the descendants of the dispossessed, raised in the shadows of giants, and told that the shadows are all there is. Ask yourself why the basements of our oldest buildings are often grander than the foyers. Why are there tunnels beneath every major city that stretch for miles, built with a precision that defies the horse and cart era? These are the veins of the old world, the hidden infrastructure that they couldn't quite destroy. They just walled them off. They called them sewers. They called them subways. They called them utility corridors. But they were the arteries of an empire that knew how to move more than just water and waste. The skepticism of authority is not a choice. It is a necessity when you realize the authority is based on a fundamental lie. The institutional erasure is so complete that even the mention of Tartaria is met with ridicule. It is the ultimate defense mechanism to make the truth sound like insanity. But the buildings remain. The stone does. not lie. The way the light hits the copper domes at a certain frequency, the way the sound echoes in the rotundas, the way the very air feels different inside a cathedral compared to a modern glass box. It is a residual energy, a ghost of the technology that once was. We are told that the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago was a temporary white city built of plaster and wood, designed to be torn down. But look at the photos. Look at the scale. Look at the fountains and the statues and the massive electrified palaces. You are telling me they built a functioning utopia in 2 years just to burn it to the ground? Not for a celebration. Not for a fair. Something else. It was a funeral. It was the final display of the old world's glory before the new world's owners dismantled it forever. I have stood in the middle of these emptied cities, in the quiet hours of the night, when the modern world falls away. You can feel the weight of the absence. It's a pressure in the chest, a ringing in plaids. The ears. The architecture is calling out, demanding to be recognized for what it truly is. It is not just stone and mortar. It is a language, a geometric code that speaks of a harmony between man and the cosmos that we have long since forgotten. We are told we are the pinnacle of evolution, the most advanced civilization to ever grace the earth. What if we are the decline? What if we are the dark ages? The staccato rhythm of our progress is a frantic attempt to cover up the slow, melodic perfection of what came before. The load distribution of our current society is top-heavy, built on a foundation of sand and deception. It cannot hold. The cracks are already beginning to show, and through those cracks, the old world is peeking out. There is a sense of forbidden knowledge that comes with this investigation. It changes the way you see every brick, every archway, every rusted iron fence. You stop seeing a city and start seeing a crime scene. The evidence is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. It is in the fountain that used to be a thermal vent. It is in the monument that used to be a power node. It is in the basement that used to be a ground floor. We are living in a house we didn't build, reading books we didn't write, and following laws that were never meant for us. The institutional gatekeepers will tell you it's all fringe theory, a conspiracy, a misunderstanding of architectural history. Ask yourself why they are so eager to dismiss it. Why do they get so angry when you question the timeline? Why is it so important that we believe we were the first? Because if we realise we weren't the first, we might realise we don't have to be the last. We might realise that the primitive past was more advanced than our modern present. We are left with an unresolved philosophical open loop. If an entire global civilization can be erased in a century, what does that say about the permanence of our own? If the cities we call home are actually the repurposed relics of a vanished empire, who are we? Are we the masters of the world, or are we just the current tenants? The mystery of the emptied Tartarian cities is not just a historical curiosity. It is a mirror. It forces us to look at the fragility of our own narrative and the ease with which the truth can be buried under a layer of mud and a new coat of paint. The investigation doesn't end here. It can't. Not as long as the star forts remain. Not as long as the buried windows stare back at us from the pavement. Not as long as the silence in the archives is louder than the words in the textbooks. What if the end of their world was the beginning of ours? And what if our world is just a temporary structure built on the bones of something far greater? Ask yourself, what if? The excavation of the narrative begins not with the shovels of archaeologists, but with the ledgers of the bankers. If you track the capital, you find the erasure. In the mid-1800s, the global financial system underwent a structural realignment that mirrors the physical destruction of the Tartarian infrastructure. It was a foreclosure on a global scale. We are told the transition from the old world to the new was a natural evolution of the free market, not a transition, not an evolution, a hostile takeover. The low distribution of wealth shifted from the many to the few, synchronized perfectly with the discovery of these empty cities. Consider the massive stone banks that anchors every street corner in the oldest parts of our cities. They are built like fortresses because they were meant to guard more than just gold. They were the administrative hubs for the rebranding of reality. They are the gatekeepers of the new timeline. Ask yourself why the most ornate, indestructible buildings in any city are always the ones that handle the debt. It is a psychological reinforcement of the new order. The architecture is designed to make you feel small, indebted, and temporary. It is an institutional gaslighting etched in granite. We must look closer at the great exhibitions that peppered the late 19th century. London, Paris, Chicago, St. Louis. They were presented as celebrations of human progress, but they functioned as industrial-scale demolition sites. They built these temporary pavilions of such immense scale and complexity that modern engineers still marvel at the logistical impossibility of their construction. And then, once the crowds went home, they blew them up, they bulldozed them, they lit them on fire. Why? If you have a functioning, electrified city of marble and light, why would you destroy it? The answer lies in the technology. These fairs were the final functioning remnants of the Tartarian power grid. They were the last places where the public could see free atmospheric energy in action before it was suppressed. They called it the magic of electricity, but it wasn't a new invention. It was a recovery of an ancient mastery. And by destroying the fairs, the new controllers ensured that no one would remember a world where energy didn't come with a monthly bill. They turned the evidence of a superior past into a weekend's entertainment, then wiped the slate clean. The narrative of the Wild West is perhaps the greatest fiction ever sold to the modern mind. We are told of rugged pioneers moving into a vast, empty wilderness, slowly building small wooden towns. But when you will look at the early photographs of San Francisco, Salt Lake City, or Denver, you see something else. You see massive, weathered stone structures that look centuries old, standing amidst a handful of mud-covered tents. You see streetcar tracks already laid in the dirt before the first settlers even arrived. You see Mormon temples built with a mathematical precision that rivals the Great Pyramid, constructed by a handful of farmers with no heavy machinery and no local quarries. The story doesn't fit the physics. The load distribution of the history is skewed. What if the pioneers weren't building? What if they were uncovering? What if the gold rush wasn't a search for nuggets in a stream, but a systematic looting of the abandoned Tartarian treasuries? They didn't settle the land, they occupied the ruins. In the archives of the Smithsonian and the British Museum, there are rooms that no one is allowed to enter. These are the repositories of the out-of-place artifacts that threaten the official timeline. They are the giant's bones found in the mounds of the Ohio Valley. They are the intricate mechanical devices recovered from the depths of the Mediterranean. They are the maps that show Antarctica without ice, mapped with a precision that requires aerial surveying. The institutional gatekeeping is not about protecting the public from pseudoscience. It is about protecting the monopoly on the past. If the public realized that a high-tech global civilization existed and was destroyed only 200 years ago, The current power structures would lose their legitimacy overnight. The authority would be revealed as nothing more than a group of squatters who stole the keys to the library. Ask yourself why every major archaeological find that contradicts the narrative is immediately seized and lost by a government agency. Not a mistake, not a coincidence, a policy of erasure. The rhythm of the erasure is staccato, a series of sharp, violent breaks in the chain of memory. World War I was not just a geopolitical conflict, it was the final clean-up. The artillery fire of the Great War wasn't just aimed at soldiers, it was aimed at the architecture of Europe. They targeted the old cathedrals, the ancient libraries, and the star-shaped citadels. They levelled the physical markers of the old world under the guise of total war. When the dust settled, the maps were redrawn, the empires were dismantled, and the last generation that remembered the old world was dead in the trenches. The lost generation wasn't just lost because of trauma, were lost because their history had been deleted while they were fighting. They returned to a world that had been scrubbed of its origin. They were told they were fighting for democracy and freedom, but they were actually the demolition crew for the last vestiges of the Tartarian era. Consider the mental asylums of the late 19th century. Massive, sprawling complexes built like palaces, often located on the outskirts of these repopulated cities. We are told they were for the treatment of the insane, but look at the numbers. The capacity of these institutions was staggering. Who were they really holding? What if these were the processing centres for the survivors of the old world? What if the insane were simply those who refused to accept the new narrative? Those who remembered the technology, those who remembered the true history, those who still knew how to operate the atmospheric energy collectors. To silence a truth, you don't always have to kill the witness, you just have. To label them mad, you put them behind stone walls, you take away their voice, and you let the new generation grow up thinking their stories are nothing more than the ramblings of the broken-minded. It is a sombre realization. Our psychiatric history may actually be a history of political and historical suppression. The urban exploration of our own cities reveals the layers of this deception. You descend into the utility tunnels and find brickwork that is superior to the buildings above. You find arched doorways that lead into solid earth. You find staircases that go nowhere. These are the fossils of the Tartarian cities, the parts that were too deep or too sturdy to be easily removed. They are the sunk levels, the remnants of a world that was literally buried under a new layer of artificial soil. We are told this was grading, a necessary process to level the terrain for modern sewage systems. But you don't grade a city by burying the first floor of every building in it. You do that to hide the evidence of a flood, a mud flood, a global event that left the cities standing but emptied, filled with the silt of a cataclysm that the textbooks refuse to mention. The mud wasn't just dirt, it was a reset button. The technical language of the New World is a language of limitation. We moved from ether to vacuum, from resonance to friction, from harmony to entropy. We were taught that energy is scarce, that life is a struggle for survival, and that we are lucky to have what little we've been given. This is the pseudo-academic language of a prison. It is designed to keep us from looking up, from realizing that the very air around us is crackling with the power that once lit the cities of Tartaria without a single wire. The load distribution of our intellect has been redirected toward the trivial and the divisive. We argue over politics and borders while the true masters of the world laugh from their inherited palaces. They know that as long as we believe we are the pinnacle of progress, We will never look for the heights we have actually lost. Ask yourself why the classics are so heavily emphasized in the education of the elite. Not because of the literature, not because of the philosophy, because of the architecture. The elite are taught the true purpose of the domes and the pillars. They are taught how to read the geometric code that remains in the landscape. They are taught that they are the stewards of a legacy that the common man is too primitive to understand. They maintain the historical mystery because it is the source of their power. They are not our leaders, they are the curators of our ignorance. They keep the lights low and the noise high, so we never notice the cracks in the ceiling, but the cracks are there and they are widening. We end this segment of the investigation with an unresolved philosophical open loop. If we are indeed the squatters in a ruined paradise, what is our responsibility to the truth? Are we content to live in the mud of the new world, or do we have the courage to dig? The somber reality is that the truth may not set us free. It may only show us the bars of our cage, but even a cage is better understood than ignored. The investigation into why entire cities were left standing but emptied is not just about the past. It is about the present. It is about the very nature of what we call civilization. What if the most important things we know are the things we have been forced to forget? What if the silence of the Tartarian ruins is not a sign of death, but a patient, stone-cold waiting? Ask yourself, what if the builders never truly left? What if they are just waiting for us to stop playing in their shadows and start looking at the sun? Wait for the next part. The geometry of the modern cemetery is perhaps the most overlooked piece of the architectural puzzle. If you study the grand necropolises established in the mid-19th century, Greenwood in New York, Highgate in London, Père Lachaise in Paris, you notice a recurring motif. These are not merely graveyards. They are miniature cities of the old world, mirrored in stone. They feature the same obelisks, the same domed mausoleums, and the same Greco-Roman aesthetics as the newly built capitals of the living. Ask yourself why a grieving family in 1860 would commission a tomb that requires more structural engineering than the local town hall. Not for sentiment, not for status. Something else. These cemeteries were the staging grounds for the final disposal of Tartarian artifacts. Large-scale machinery and anomalous technology were not destroyed so much as they were interred. They are the silent witnesses to a mass burial of history itself. The classical style of the tomb is a coded marker, a way for those in the know to identify which vaults contain more than just bone. The institutional gatekeeping of these sacred grounds prevents any true excavation, ensuring that the heavy lead linings of the caskets remain undisturbed. We are taught to respect the dead, but we are never told that we are actually respecting the evidence of a technological murder. Consider the role of the Grand Tour in the education of the 19th century aristocrat. It was a pilgrimage to the ruins of Europe and the Near East, ostensibly to soak in culture and art. But look at the journals of these travellers. They speak of discovering cities in the desert that were already fully formed, of finding marble palaces in the middle of nowhere, of encountering natives who had no idea how the structures they inhabited were built. The load distribution of these narratives always places the European elite as the natural heirs to these ruins. They were surveying the property. They were cataloguing the spoils of a global collapse. The pseudo-academic language used to describe these sites, calling them Roman or Byzantine, was a standardized nomenclature designed to strip the original builders of their identity. By categorizing everything into a neat, linear timeline of fallen empires, the controllers ensured that the concept of a single, unified, high-tech global civilization remained unthinkable. It was a linguistic coup, not a discovery, not an exploration, a repossession. The staccato rhythm of the 19th century Industrial Revolution was not a birth, but a cannibalization. We are told that James Watt invented the steam engine, but if you look at the technical drawings of the era, the complexity of the valves and the heat-resistant alloys exceeds the smelting capabilities of the time. We didn't invent these machines, we salvaged them. We found the massive boilers and the intricate gear systems in the basements of the emptied cities and repurposed them to run on coal instead of the clean, resonant energy they were designed for. We took a symphony and turned it into a factory. This is why early industrial architecture is so strangely ornate. Why would a coal-fired pumping station have stained glass windows and vaulted ceilings? Because it wasn't built as a pumping station. It was built as a harmonic resonator, a temple to the frequency of the earth, which we gutted and stuffed with pistons and soot. We are like children who found a Stradivarius and decided to use it as a cricket bat. What if the Great Famine of Ireland and the Gulp Bowls of the American West were not natural disasters, but the deliberate atmospheric manipulation of a dying system? If the Tartarian grid functioned on the ionization of the upper atmosphere, then sabotaging that grid would have catastrophic meteorological consequences. The erasure of the technology caused the climate to reset, leading to localized collapses of the agricultural system. This provided the perfect cover for the displacement of populations. You empty the land, you let the mud settle, and then you move in the settlers who have no memory of what the sky used to look like. The skepticism of authority must extend to the very weather itself. The institutional gatekeepers tell us we are at the mercy of a chaotic nature, but the star forts suggest a world where humanity lived in a regulated, energetic balance with the environment. The natural world we see today is actually a scarred landscape, recovering from a high-frequency divorce. The contrast of scale in our modern cities is a physical manifestation of our decline. We build with steel and glass, materials that have a lifespan of barely a century, on top of granite and basalt foundations that have stood for millennia. Our skyscrapers are load-bearing only in the sense that they rely on constant maintenance and external power to survive. The Tartarian buildings, by contrast, were self-sustaining. Their thick walls provided natural insulation, their domes collected energy, and their orientation followed the ley lines of the planet. They were built for eternity. We build for the next fiscal quarter. This is the ultimate institutional erasure, the destruction of the concept of permanence. By forcing us to live in a disposable world, the controllers ensure that we never think long-term. We are trapped in a cycle of debt and decay, too busy repairing our leaking roofs to notice that the buildings next door have stood perfectly silent and dry for 500 years without a single repair. Ask yourself why the national parks were truly created. We are told it was to preserve the wilderness, but look at the locations: Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, Yosemite. These are areas of intense geological and energetic activity, often containing the most blatant remnants of pre-cataclysmic structures, massive rock formations that bear the unmistakable geometry of melted citadels, canyons that look more like open-pit mines. By labeling these areas as wilderness, the government can restrict access, ban excavation, and control the narrative. They are not protecting nature from us. They are protecting the secrets of the old world from our curiosity. The rangers are the new temple guards, ensuring that no one wanders off the designated trail and finds the staircase carved into the living mountain that leads to a door that shouldn't exist. Not a park, not a preserve, a crime scene under 24-hour surveillance. The anaphora of new in the late 19th century is telling. The new world, the new age, the new deal, the new history. Everything had to be new because the old was still too visible, too tangible. They had to create a psychological barrier between the survivor generation and their children. They did this through the mandatory schooling system, which was pioneered at the exact same time these emptied cities were being repopulated. The curriculum was designed not to educate, but to domesticate. It replaced the intuitive understanding of the world with a series of rote-learned facts that supported the new power structure. The load distribution of the human mind was shifted from observation to obedience. If a child pointed at a half-buried building and asked, why? The teacher was there to say, it's just the way it's always been. The erasure was not just in the books. It was in the very way we were taught to process reality. Look at the statues that populate our public squares. We are told they are bronze or stone tributes to local heroes cast in the 1880s. But look at the detail. The lace on the collars, the veins in the hands, the individual hairs on the head. This is not the work of a chisel. It is the work of a sophisticated casting process, or perhaps something even more advanced, a form of petrification or electroplating that we can no longer replicate. Many of these statues were not made by us. They were found. They are the inhabitants of the Tartarian cities, caught in a moment of technological or cataclysmic stasis. We simply gave them new names and put them on pedestals. We are surrounded by the frozen images of the people we replaced, and we walk past them every day without a second thought. It is a somber, silent parade of the dispossessed. The technical terms of the 19th century patent office reveal a frantic scramble to own what was already there. If you look at the surge in patents between 1870 and 1900, you see the fundamental components of the Tartarian world being invented by individuals with ties to the new financial elite. Tesla, Edison, Bell. These men were not lone geniuses. They were the receivers of recovered knowledge. They were tasked with interpreting the found technology and figuring out how to put a meter on it. The war of the currents was not about which system was better. It was about which system was easier to control, easier to charge for, and easier to weaponize. The original wireless, resonant energy of the Tartarian grid was suppressed because it was unprofitable. The history of science is not a record of discovery. It is a record of the enclosure of the commons of the mind. We are left with an unresolved philosophical open loop. If our entire reality is a rebrand of a superior erased civilization, what does that mean for our sense of identity? We are like amnesiacs living in a palace, convinced that we are the servants. The mystery of why these cities were left standing but emptied is the key to our own liberation. To understand the how of their destruction is to understand the why of our current condition. We are not a burgeoning species on the verge of the stars. We are a traumatized remnant picking through the trash of our ancestors. But in that trash, there are seeds, there are diagrams, there is the memory of a world that didn't need to burn coal to see the stars. The investigation continues because the truth is not something you find. It is something you remember. Ask yourself, what if the memory is already inside you, waiting for the right frequency to wake it up? Wait for the next part. The photographic record of the mid-19th century is a curated gallery of ghosts. If you examine the long exposure plates of the 1850s and 60s, you see the massive stone triumphs of Paris, Washington, D.C., and St. Petersburg, yet the streets are utterly, unnervingly empty. We are told the exposure times were too long to capture moving people, that the bustling crowds simply blurred into invisibility. Ask yourself if that is a physical reality or a convenient excuse for the institutional erasure of a depopulated world, not a technical limitation, not a quirk of the lens, something else. In these photos, the horses and carriages, which would have stood still for minutes at a time at hitching posts, are missing. The street vendors are missing. The life is missing. What remains are the grand, silent sentinels of Tartaria, perfectly preserved, waiting for the settlers to be shipped in from the hinterlands. The low distribution of the narrative relies on you believing that the people were there but invisible. But what if the camera didn't lie? What if the cities were truly empty, left standing as a turnkey civilization for the new administrators to occupy? This is the somber truth of the Great Reset of the 1800s. They didn't build the world, they merely inherited the silence and filled it with a new, louder lie. The technical terms of urban renewal and metropolitan improvement are the euphemisms of a cover-up. If you look at the renovation of Paris under Haussmann, you see a systematic destruction of the old medieval-looking neighbourhoods to make way for the grand boulevards. We are told this was for sanitation and traffic, but the geometry of the new Paris is a carbon copy of the Starfort energy grid. The boulevards are not streets, they are waveguides. The monuments at the centre of the radiating avenues are not tributes to fallen soldiers, they are the capacitors of a discarded power system. The institutional gatekeepers of the 1860s weren't improving the city, they were stripping it of its original function while maintaining its aesthetic shell. They tore down the residential quarters where the survivors lived and replaced them with grand facades that the new elite could call their own. It was a massive city-wide rebranding project that turned a living, breathing energy hub into a museum of state power. The staccato rhythm of the jackhammer was the heartbeat of the erasure. The contrast of scale between the old world and the new man is most evident in the doorways. Walk through the historic districts of any major European or American city and look at the height of the main entrances. They are 12, 15, 20 feet tall. We are told this was for grandeur or ventilation, but the load distribution of the hinges and the placement of the door handles suggest a different occupant. Not a human of our stature, something else. When you see a 5-foot tall Victorian man standing in front of a 20-foot tall door, the disproportion is jarring. It is an architectural admission that we are living in a world designed for giants. The erasure trope has worked so well that we look at these doors every day and see only art, never once asking why a society supposedly obsessed with the cost of heating and materials would build entrances 4 times larger than necessary. We are the small inhabitants of a big world, scurrying through the corridors of our predecessors like mice in a mansion. Ask yourself about the Crystal Palace of 1851, a massive structure of glass and iron over 1,800 feet long, built in less than 9 months. We are told it was a feat of British industrial might, but look at the materials. Tens of thousands of sheets of identical high-quality glass produced in an era where glass blowing was still largely a manual artisanal craft. The math does not hold. The industrial capacity of the time could not have produced the inventory, let alone assembled it in the time frame provided. The pseudo-academic explanation is prefabrication, but this is a word used to hide the reality of retrieval. The Crystal Palace wasn't built. It was reassembled from a pre-existing Tartarian modular system. It was a showcase of a technology they had found but couldn't yet fully replicate. And like the other great exhibitions, it was eventually moved, then burned, then erased from the physical landscape. They couldn't let it stand because it was a constant reminder of a manufacturing capability that bypassed the need for the dark, satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution. The skeletal remains of the Tartarian world are often labelled as Roman ruins or Greek antiquities, even when they are found in the heart of the Americas or the depths of the Russian taiga. This is the ultimate institutional gatekeeping. By assigning all high-level masonry to a distant, safely dead past, the controllers prevent us from connecting the dots of a more recent global civilization. They tell us that the Colosseum style of architecture is a relic of a 2,000-year-old empire, but then we find the same Colosseum structures in 19th century America, labelled as temporary fairground attractions. Not ancient, not temporary, something else. It was a global standard, a universal language of form and function that ignored the borders we are now taught to die for. The skepticism of authority begins when you realize that history is just a series of labels designed to keep the artifacts from speaking to each other across the centuries. Consider the role of the World's Fair as a psychological conditioning tool. These events were the only times the common people were allowed to see the full glory of the inherited cities before they were dismantled or modernized. They were given a taste of the future, which was actually the past, and told it was the result of the new government's brilliance. They saw the electric light and the moving walkways and the telecommunications, and they were told these were brand new inventions. They were mesmerized by the scale and the beauty, and so they didn't ask where the builders had gone. They didn't ask why the fair was built on top of a marsh that already had a complete sewer and subway system. The fairs were the re-education camps of the 19th century, designed to turn a disoriented, repopulated public into a grateful, obedient workforce. They were the bait on a hook that has been in our mouths for over 100 years. The staccato rhythm of the great fires suggests a coordinated demolition of the evidence. Chicago, 1871. Boston, 1872. Seattle, 1889. San Francisco, 1906. Each time, the story is the same. A small, accidental spark leads to the total destruction of the most sophisticated stone and brick buildings in the city. But stone doesn't burn. Brick doesn't vaporize. The photos of the aftermath of the Chicago fire look more like Hiroshima than a timber-fed blaze. The low distribution of the rubble shows buildings that were leveled from the inside out, their heavy iron frames twisted like taffy. These weren't fires, they were thermal events. They were the use of directed energy or advanced explosives to clear out the Tartarian hubs that were too large to be repurposed. They erased the heart of the old world to make room for the steel and concrete cages of the new, and in every case, the new city was built with a fraction of the beauty and 100 times the debt. The anaphora of erasure continues into the realm of the biological. What happened to the people who built these cities? Where are the Tartarians? If you look at the paintings and daguerreotypes of the mid-1800s, you see a strange, sombre uniformity in the people. They are the immigrants, the refugees, the orphans. They are people without a lineage, people who have been uprooted and transplanted. The original inhabitants, the masters of the resonance, and the architects of the star forts are gone. Perhaps they were the victims of the same cataclysm that brought the mud. Perhaps they were harvested, or perhaps they simply left, realizing that the world they had built was being occupied by a force they could no longer resonate with. We are the leftovers, the inhabitants of a house whose owners never came back. We have been told we are the heirs, but we feel, deep in our bones, like we are trespassing. The technical language of geology is used to hide the archaeology of the old world. When we see a mountain with perfectly flat tops and 90-degree angles, we are told it is erosion or volcanic activity. When we see caves with smooth, polished walls and ventilation shafts, we are told they are natural formations. The institutional gatekeeping of the earth itself ensures that we never recognize the planet as a terraformed industrial site. The massive buttes of the American West are the slag heaps of a mining operation that spanned the globe. The oceans are the flooded quarries. The load distribution of our entire planet has been altered by a civilization that operated on a scale we cannot conceive of. We are walking on the roof of a giant factory and calling it nature. Not natural, not accidental. Something else. We end this part with a lingering, unresolved, philosophical open loop. If we are indeed living in the ruins of a global industrial project, what is the purpose of our current civilization? Are we the caretakers, or are we the cleanup crew? The mystery of the emptied cities is not a puzzle to be solved, but a reality to be inhabited. To look at a hill and see a building is to break the spell of the erasure. It is to regain a sense of forbidden knowledge that has been systematically stripped from us since the first orphan train pulled into the station. The investigation is a journey from the known lie to the unknown truth, and the truth is waiting just beneath the mud for someone to stop asking how and start asking who. Ask yourself, if you found the keys to the city, would you even know which door to open? Wait for the next part. The institutional erasure of the Tartarian infrastructure reaches its most frantic peak in the silencing of the great organs. These massive, ornate instruments, housed in the most significant cathedrals and city halls across the globe, are described to us as mere musical curiosities. Ask yourself why a pre-industrial society would devote such immense load distribution and precision engineering to a hobby. Not for music, not for liturgy, something else. These were frequency modulators. The pipes were not for air, but for the movement of ionized gases, vibrating at a resonance that could heal the body or stabilize the atmosphere of the entire city. The organist was a technician of the ether, a conductor of the invisible currents that kept the population in a state of high vibrational harmony. When the new administrators took over, they gutted the internal mechanisms, replaced the resonant gases with simple bellows, and told us the music was for the glory of a distant god. They turned a biological and environmental stabilization tool into a tool for psychological and spiritual subjection. The staccato rhythm of the hymns we sing today is a broken echo of the continuous healing hum of the old world. Consider the canals of the 19th century. We are told of the heroic efforts to dig the Erie, the Suez, and the Panama canals using little more than shovels and grit. But look at the stone embankments. Look at the locks that operate on principles of hydraulic pressure that were supposedly discovered decades later. The technical terms of the period describe these as man-made waterways, but the geological evidence suggests they are the irrigation and transport arteries of a global terraformed system. The mud flood didn't just bury the buildings, it choked the veins of the world. The canal era was not a period of construction, but a period of dredging. The new empires weren't creating new routes. They were clearing the silt from the old ones to restart the flow of commerce and control. They took the lifeblood of a unified planet and carved it into nationalized borders, turning a shared resource into a weapon of economic war. The institutional gatekeeping of our maritime history is a wall of water and lies, designed to keep us from realizing that the world was once a single, connected garden. The contrast of scale in the antique maps of the North Pole is the most provocative piece of evidence for a missing continent. Maps from the 1500s and 1600s, drawn with a precision that defies the primitive tools of the time, consistently show 4 large islands at the pole, divided by a central black mountain or magnetic peak. By the mid-1800s, these islands vanish, replaced by a generic ice cap. We are told the old cartographers were merely speculating or hallucinating. But if they were hallucinating the North Pole, why were they so accurate about the coastlines of South America and Africa? The erasure wasn't just of a country called Tartaria, it was of the centre of the world itself. The magnetic north was the anchor of the Tartarian energy grid, the ground for the atmospheric electricity they harvested. By removing the central continent from the maps and the public consciousness, the controllers severed our connection to the source of our planetary energy. They left us spinning in a void, disconnected from the very heart of our home. Ask yourself why the founding fathers of the United States were so obsessed with classical architecture in a raw, unformed wilderness. They built the Capitol, the White House, and the Treasury in a style that was already thousands of years old, using stone that shouldn't have been available and labour that wasn't there. The load distribution of the narrative suggests they were inspired by Rome and Greece. But what if they weren't building a new Rome? What if they were occupying the regional headquarters of the Tartarian administration in the Americas? The District of Columbia was not a swamp. It was a star-fought city, partially submerged in the mud of the cataclysm, which was excavated and renamed. The Greek revival was not a fashion choice. It was a recovery operation. The skepticism of authority is the only rational response when you realise that the cradle of democracy is actually a repurposed colonial outpost of a global empire that was liquidated before the ink on the Constitution was dry. The pseudo-academic language of evolution and social Darwinism emerged at the exact moment the survivors of the old world needed to be marginalised. If you tell a people they are the fittest survivors of a brutal, primitive past, they will never look back with longing. They will see the ruins of the old world not as a lost paradise, but as a stepping stone to their own greatness. The erasure trope works by making the past seem lesser than the present. We are taught that the people of the 1700s lived in filth and ignorance, despite the fact that they inhabited marble palaces with underfloor heating and indoor plumbing that we still struggle to maintain. The load distribution of our self-esteem is built on a lie of superiority. We are told we are the peak, but we are the valley. We are the scavenger generation, convinced that we are the pioneer generation, too proud of our flickering light bulbs to notice the extinguished suns of our ancestors. The staccato sentences of the 19th century telegraph were the first digital cage. We moved from the instantaneous resonant communication of the old world, the telepathy of the harmonic grid, to a system of dots and dashes that could be intercepted, censored, and taxed. The institutional gatekeeping of information began with the wire. They told us it was a miracle of speed, but it was actually a deceleration of thought. It forced us to compress our words, to simplify our language, and to rely on a central hub for the transmission of truth. The news became something that was delivered rather than something that was felt. The erasure of the old world's communication methods ensured that we could no longer hear the planet speaking to us. We were plugged into a man-made frequency, a rhythmic tapping that drowned out the music of the spheres. Consider the star forts of the American interior: Fort Deschartres, Fort Ticonderoga, Fort Jefferson. They are built with a mathematical complexity that serves no defensive purpose against the primitive weapons of the frontier. Look at the load distribution of the masonry. These are not forts, they are massive earth grounding devices. They are the anchors for the atmospheric energy harvested by the cities. Many of them are located at the intersections of major rivers and ley lines, acting as valves for the planetary current. The institutional gatekeepers call them outposts of empire, but they are the circuit breakers of a world that once ran on light. When the wars of the 18th and 19th centuries took place, they weren't fighting for land. They were fighting for the keys to these stations. The side that controlled the star forts controlled the energy of the region, and once they had control, they decommissioned them, turning the power plants into historic landmarks where tourists can buy postcards and ignore the geometry beneath their feet. The anaphora of progress is the siren song of the new world. Progress is the excuse for the destruction of the old. Progress is the reason we must modernize the streets, standardize the languages, and regulate the airwaves. Every time the word progress is used, something of the old world is being buried. The technical terms of the industrial age were designed to make the extraction of resources seem like a noble endeavor, rather than a desperate looting of a dying planet. We are told we are developing the world, but we are actually devolving it. The complexity of the Tartarian cities, with their integrated energy systems and harmonious aesthetics, has been replaced by the load distribution of the grey concrete box. We have traded beauty for efficiency and resonance for utility. We have been told that this is the only way to live, but the emptied cities stand as a silent, stone-cold rebuttal to the lie of our necessity. The skepticism of authority must extend to our very understanding of human nature. We are told we are inherently violent, greedy, and competitive, and that the state is necessary to keep us from each other's throats. This is the narrative of the reset. If you take a traumatized population of orphans and refugees and put them in a ruined world, they will act like animals. You then point to that behavior as proof of our nature and use it to justify the new laws and the new hierarchies. But what if the people of Tartaria weren't like us? What if their architecture was a reflection of a nature that was cooperative, resonant, and peaceful? What if the fall wasn't a spiritual event, but a technological and social one? The sombre truth is that we are being held in a state of artificial conflict to prevent us from remembering our true capacity for harmony. We are the wild humans being broken by the tamer elites who use the ruins of our own home as the bars of our cage. We end this part with an unresolved philosophical open loop. If the world was once a unified, high-frequency civilization, and we are the descendants of the reset, can we ever truly go back? Or is the mud too deep, the erasure too complete, and the debt too heavy? The mystery of why the cities were left standing is the mystery of the bait. They left the cities so we would have a place to live, a place to serve, and a place to forget. But they forgot one thing. Stone remembers. The resonance of the old world is still there, vibrating beneath the pavement, waiting for a generation that is tired of the noise to finally listen to the silence. Ask yourself, are you ready to hear the music that the great organs were truly meant to play?